Started the camera recording. It's now recording, and you introduce yourself and you come in and you begin your presentation. We're now going to talk about combining signed numbers. I'll give you an example of what I mean with this set of numbers, plus 7 and plus 4. But they can be in different sign patterns. We could also have minus 7, minus 4, or we could have plus 7 minus 4, or we could have minus 7 plus 4. In all these instances, you see that we're dealing with signs. So the subject here is combining signed numbers. Notice that you might have been tempted to say, in the first set we are adding, in the second we're subtracting. This is problematical. It's much better to say that no matter what the signs, you're neither adding nor subtracting, but simply combining. So we're going to deal with all of these under the umbrella of combining signed numbers. They come in two types. The first type is where the signs are the same. The second type is where the signs are not the same. The first type, when the signs are the same, follows a certain rule for producing the result. And that rule is called Rule 1. And it is stated as follows. If the numbers have the same sign, then add the numbers and the result has that sign. So Rule 1, if the two numbers have the same sign, whether it be positive or negative, then the rule is that you add the numbers and the answer has that sign. So if we have the plus 7 plus 4, the numbers have the same sign, so Rule 1 applies. So we add the numbers producing the 11, and the answer has the sign. So the answer is a plus 11. If we have a minus 7 minus 4, the numbers now also have the same sign, and Rule 1 also applies. So we add the numbers producing the 11, and the answer has the sign in question. Now let's go to Rule 2. If we have two numbers that have different signs, minus 7 plus 4. Rule 2, if the numbers have different signs, then subtract the smaller number from the larger, and the result has the sign of the larger. So let's illustrate what we mean. If we have the minus 7 and plus 4, these numbers have different signs, so Rule 2 applies. Rule 2 states that you will subtract the smaller number from the larger, disregarding the signs at the moment, just the numbers themselves. The 4 is the smaller number, the 7 is the larger number. So we subtract the smaller number from the larger, producing a 3. And the answer has the sign of the larger, and we're done. So if you have a different number, problem like plus 7 minus 4, the numbers have different signs, so Rule 2 applies. Rule 2 says to to subtract the smaller number from the larger, producing a 3. And the answer has a sign of the larger, which is a plus 3. So let's just look at some examples of Rule 1 and Rule 2. Suppose that we have a minus 7, minus 6. Does Rule 1 or Rule 2 apply? The numbers have the same sign, so Rule 1 applies. To remind ourselves, Rule 1 is that if the numbers have the same sign, then add the numbers and the answer has that sign. So the numbers have the same sign, so we're to add the numbers and the answer has that sign. So let's try a different problem. Minus 7 plus 6. Does Rule 1 or Rule 2 apply? The numbers have different signs, so Rule 2 applies. Rule 2. If the numbers have different signs, then subtract the smaller number from the larger, and the result has the sign of the larger. So Rule 2, when the numbers have different signs, we subtract the smaller number from the larger. We subtract a 6 from a 7, producing a 1, and the answer has a sign of the larger. So Rule 2 applies. Let's try another one. Minus 12 plus 3. Rule 2 applies because they have different signs. So we subtract the smaller from the larger, producing a 9, and the answer has the sign of the larger. Let's try another one. 12 plus 4. The numbers have the same sign, so Rule 1 applies. We add the number, and the answer has the sign of both numbers. Let's try a minus 6 minus 3. Rule 1 applies because they have the same sign, so we produce a 9, and the answer has the sign of the numbers. But let's try a minus 6 plus 3. The numbers have different signs, so Rule 2 applies. We subtract the smaller from the larger, producing the number 3, and the sign of the answer is a sign of the larger. So let's try a 6 minus 3. Rule 2 applies because they have different signs, so we subtract the smaller from the larger, producing a 3, and the answer has a sign of the larger. So let's go back to our original set of 4 and see what we produced. A 7 plus 4 equals, a minus 7 minus 4 equals, a minus 7 plus 4 equals, and a 7 minus 4 equals. No longer ever again thinking of adding or subtracting, but just combining sign numbers. The first one, the numbers have the same sign, so Rule 1 applies. We add the numbers, and the answer has that sign. The second set have the same sign, so Rule 1 applies again. We add the numbers, and the answer has that sign. The third set, the numbers have different signs, so Rule 2 applies. So what we do is subtract the smaller from the larger, and the answer has the sign of the larger. The fourth set, the numbers have different signs, so Rule 2 applies. We subtract the smaller from the larger, and the answer has the sign of the larger. So this is a short video tutorial on combining sign numbers. It works just as well whether the numbers are integers, whether they're fractions, or whether they're decimals. When we see sign numbers, we only think of combining them, not of whether we're adding or subtracting, and whether they have the same sign or different signs tells us whether that we use the Rule 1 or the Rule 2. Off camera. So there, I finished creating the video tutorial on my subject. So at this point, I simply go back and turn my camera off.